Hello and good day, eh? Welcome to the Super Good Camping Podcast. My name is Pamela.
I'm Tim.
And we are from supergoodcamping.com. We are here because we're on a mission to inspire other families to enjoy camping adventures such as we have with our kids. Today's guest is an absolute icon of the Canadian outdoors. Some highlights about him are that he is a conservationist, author, artist, explorer, naturalist, too many words to describe, cartographer, photographer, canoe tripper, a member of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, and an international fellow of the Explorers Club. He created Eco Trail Builders and Cabin Falls Eco Lodge, which we'll only like to touch on today because there is so much to this gentleman that we're going to try to twist his arm and get him back for another episode down the road. Please welcome Mr. Hap Wilson. Woo! Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
You've been on the bucket list for a while.
You have, yeah. I'm going to quickly touch on a couple of things before we get deeply into it. You've written a whack of books, and I think when I looked at it, it was with first, second, third editions, depending on how did it tally out at like 23? Does that sound about right?
What number of books or editions?
Well, including editions.
Yeah, it's hard to, I've lost count. I have 14 books, but I've written, co-authored several other books, probably about 8 to 10 other books, with, stories or illustrations in. So it's just, it's 14 books of my own. And I've always got 3 or 4 on the go. So
that's good. Amazing. Well, at some point, I'm sure I'm going to be tired and say, "But where do you get the energy, man?
And
you do so many things."
It's not the energy so much as it is the time.
Right.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about you're a conservationist. The two things when I was researching, I've known about you for a considerable amount of time, just because I'm a lunatic and I watch all the backcountry stuff, and whether through YouTube, Instagram, reading articles, watching other people talk about you. The two things that came to mind, I'm going to have to look at my notes now. Eco Trail Builders and Earth Roots. So talk to me about Eco Trail Builders. That sounds like a cool thing. You're trying to do minimal impact.
Yeah, Eco Trail Builders. It's a sustainable trail building company that my wife and I formed several years ago. I actually started building sustainable trails when I was a park ranger in Temagami, and the first trail we built on Temagami Island kind of kicked off the whole notion of building trails in a different way, utilizing 20 different sciences, and it's the soft approach to kind of surgically placing trails, so you don't do a lot of excavating, and everything's done mostly by hand tools. So it's and if you look at the science today, we don't know a lot of the science involved in that connectivity with the forest mat, and a lot of trail building companies are basically contracting landscapers, so they do everything pretty much with excavators, and so it's yep. These are much wider trails, and there's a purpose for them putting in certain trails, but our company bases everything on sort of an ecological integrity and use of soft products, and right down to the lubrication in our chainsaws. It's all bio oils, and wood is from, if we utilize wood products, they're either from on site that we can salvage, or they're from managed forests.
Wow, that's great. I hadn't even thought about the oil on the chainsaws.
So yeah, we're working in close to water systems and marshes, and that, building boardwalks and bridges and that. So and that's, chainsaws spray a lot of oil. So we try to be as careful as we can, because that spray will get in. It does get onto the ground and in the water, and and it's it's a caustic substance, which is not good for the environment. So for years we've used a biodegradable oil product, so it's it doesn't harm the environment. This is one of the products that we that kind of labels this as, you know, a softer approach to sustainable, you know, trail building, and just care for the environment.
Oh, it's excellent. Like tick all the boxes. That's to think it through. Totally wouldn't occur to me because I'm an idiot. But
So the trail building will try to follow the lay of the land. It will try to follow where animals have naturally already made a trail.
Yeah, but it's like you can probably notice on my nose, I've got a bit of a cut on my nose from today. You know, I put a trail in for not for a client not too far from our home here in North Muskoka towards Perry Sound, and I actually utilized a deer trail that you know, they either tend to go follow high crests, the crest of hills, just so they, you know, they can hear predators easier. They can visually, they can see, you know, what's approaching, and I went there today to finish one of those trails, and you know, I'm just finishing flagging it out for finishing this week. So it's but yeah, we utilize you know, we do a lot of transects walking properties, trying to find sensitive features. You know, if we see, for example, eagle nest, you know, we'll stay clear of that, and sensitive vegetation, and also, you know, aesthetic features like erratics, boulders, rock cuts, all interesting features. Old growth pine, old growth hemlock, any old tree stands. So we kind of map that out, and kind of join the dots, and make an interesting trail. You know, we're you know, our species, we're basically linear thinkers, but building or trail builders aren't linear thinkers at all. So, and it helps to have an artistic background too, so we can you know, our trails are surgically put in, and you know, we like to you know, inventory all of the more interesting things on a private property, whether we're doing it for, you know, private property or community, government, whatever trails we put in. You know,
can you sorry define surgically? Like, what's the how do you're trying to do as little damage to anything else around it? Is that how that plays?
That's right. Yes, that's, you know, we and one thing, you know, different types of trails demand different procedures. So, but it all depends on water. Water is, you know, one of our biggest issues building a trail. I mean, you know, we avoid fall line trails, and a lot of trails are bench cuts cut in the sides of the hills, but they have to be a certain, you know, a certain angle to be able to shed water. And again, you know, like I said, there's so many different sciences involved in, you know, in laying out a proper trail. And you know, the techniques are much different for, as you know, you mentioned the word surgical. I like that word because it's done with a lot of care and precaution, and we only take out as much as we need to. We don't cut trees down. You know, we can, with a backcountry hiking trail, for example, you can basically put a trail anywhere you want. So we can wind in and around the forest trees and boulders a lot easier than you know, trying to push through with a an excavator, you know, cutting up the earth and pushing things out of the way. Nordic trails demand wider trails, and, you know, specific you know, grades and corners. A lot more work. Winter trails don't as much worry about drainage, water issues, because everything's covered nice in snow. Mountain bike trails different again, and that takes the most care, and it's the most expensive to put in, because usually you have to have, if you don't have mineral soil for a base, then you know, sometimes you have to add some kind of hard pack over top of the ground mat. But and they, you know, again, like Nordic trails, you have to, you know, be careful of the although mountain bikers like steep pitches, that, you know, that's a given. But they also have to have for each you know, specific I guess placement of an obstacle or something. You need an easy out, so, you know, so it's less technical. So there's a lot of things to think about. Safety for one, and liability for another one. Another one is the big thing with trail building, and a lot of people for a lot of people don't understand how a trail gets there. I think we did, you know, attended a professional trail building convention in of all place, Reno, Nevada, and right upstairs from all the one-armed bandits and the roulette wheels. And I was in a room full of
environment.
my room. We were full of trail builders and all suspender wearing, bearded, old hippies, and talking trails. So it was, but I did learn a lot from that, from a larger, broader family of trail builders. That and one of the startling statistics is that most people don't know how trails get there. Like over 90% of people think trails just happen,
just magic,
and they don't. And there's so much work involved. And I was lucky. I was a guest park warden in New Zealand, looking after some trails on the South Island for a while. I got to do some trail work there and studied probably one of the best, most popular trail systems in the world in New Zealand, and brought that back to what we do here in Ontario and other places. And my wife Andrea and I have gone to England, Scotland, Ireland, the East Coast, Acadia, down through the States, South Carolina, Arizona, just studying how trails are built, and different procedures. And it really helps gain an understanding of the history of trail building, and that also extends to water trails. And that's one of the things that people don't understand is that water trails are actually very first trails that we can appreciate in Canada. All these waterways and connecting routes across the country were used by Indigenous peoples, long before we got here. And interestingly enough, when I was asked to do the Path of the Paddle, that 1,200 kilometer stretch of Trans-Canada Trail water trail from Lake Superior to Manitoba, I was astounded that Trans-Canada Trail people didn't acknowledge our Indigenous water trails until they figured that, well, we can't build a land-based trail across Northwest Ontario. There's, and that's funny. It's not funny, but it's just one of those realities about our geography and the difficulty of the terrain. And you look at the railroad had so much difficulty going through the mountains. The second hardest place to cross or build a railroad was Northwest Ontario. So these guys are sitting on a bar and created the idea of the notion of a cross Canada land trail. After a few beers, everything looks good. So, but when they hit, Northwest Ontario, they said, well, it's way too expensive and almost impossible to maintain. And so let's ask Hap Wilson if he can map out a route from Lake Superior to Manitoba and make that connection a water trail. I didn't think that much about Trans-Canada Trail because it actually repurposes a lot of old rail lines, and it's used by high impact recreationalists, ATV and snowmobiles. It's not really a traditional pathway or hiking trail,
yep,
so to speak. So water trails, I was ecstatic when they asked me to map that out. And I said, this is great. And then they said, well, it's only 500 kilometers. I said, wait a minute. That's like as the crow flies from Thunder Bay to the border of Manitoba. You're telling me that a water trail is going to be 500 kilometers. Well, in the end, it turned out to be 1,250 kilometers because, we are linear thinkers. And, when you're mapping out a water trail, there are no straight lines in Mother Nature, especially when and it was interesting because the criteria for mapping out this quintessential canoe route, water trail, had to connect difficult dots, trying to connect the communities, connect as many indigenous communities as well, avoid some of the disturbances. And there are a lot of disturbances in Northwest Ontario, as there is across this country, from logging, mining, road building, all that kind of stuff. So when you're designing a quintessential canoe route, I had to be cognizant of all of these things. And over the years, it took probably three years or more to do the field research many trips up to Northwest Ontario. And my our kids were involved in some of the routes that we mapped out. My wife certainly spent a lot of time in the canoe with me, and I did a lot of solo trips. So it was a long time in the field, and then a long time in the studio doing the guidebook for that specific project. So there you go. There's the trails. That's my trail history.
But so the realities of doing it, like, so you're out there, you must, I have to assume you're racking up things in your head and then taking copious notes when you pause for the day. And then you have to come back and compile all of that, turn it into more cohesive notes. I know when I'm writing my notes when we're on a trip, I come back and it's just a jumble of bullet points and things like that. And then occasionally I wax poetic, but that was because I had a couple of beers. And then how do you, so then you're at cartography, like you're turning it into a map as well. How does that, are you measuring? You must be measuring things, taking, notes about directions, all that sort of jazz along the way. Obviously you're not going to turn me into a cartographer by the time we're done this, but I'm curious how that reality is, like how that plays out the process of making that all happen.
Well, it's a blend of old school map making and modern technology, and we've come a long way, and I've seen it all in my own evolution of ideology when it comes to backcountry travel. It's changed so much. Initially my guidebooks were all done just using available topographic maps, but the thing about all my guidebooks and any of those projects, I go way back to the first maps that were ever made. And some of these were, they date back to the 1700s. And I get an idea of some of the older routes that, the voyagers may have taken based on what they learned from First Nations. And because First Nations were their go-to people to find these routes. And that kind of helped me. I do a lot of background research, what's available. Not a lot available for most of the books that guidebooks that I used, but then along came technology where I would look at a topographic map and guess, well, this creek looks navigable, maybe. And you look at the topographic, the contour lines and the gradient on some of these rivers, and you're kind of guessing as to the water flow in some of these small rivers and creeks, and you're trying to join the lakes together with just using primitive information. Really, some of our topo maps in the northern part of our country haven't been updated since the 1950s, 60s maybe. And you'd go in the field, you'd be paddling along a creek or something, trying to find a route through, and then you just get bogged down in swamp and tag alder, and then you find that this is not a good route to take. So now when I'm mapping out, we've got Google Earth, and I love it. We can zoom right down on a small creek system and get right down and see, well, there's snags across there, and there's boulder gardens, and you can see the configuration of rapids before you even get there. So you get a good feel for what lies ahead instead of just guesswork. So it's making my job as an explorer and map maker a lot easier. But still in the field, when I'm sitting on the side of a rapids, I'll portage, walk up and down, and then we'll run the rapids or line them down, and then take a look at we look at the high water marks, portage entry points, exit points, because they're usually on a fairly more popular river, you'll find high water landings and low water landings. So these all have to be drawn into your field sketches. So and all that stuff is compiled with notes on vegetation, and then compile that with historical information and indigenous information, cultural information, stories, myths, all that kind of stuff. That's the studio work. I come back home and I'm sitting in my studio, but I'm retracing those very trips again in my mind. And I'm, it's almost like being there again for me, drawing all of these maps, detail maps. And I really like the the style of maps, because if nobody else is really doing it, everybody's going to the digital format, and there's way too much information on them, way too much. And they're too small. They try to cram all that information on a map, and people are getting into a bit of difficulty, especially up in Temagami, where people have been using maps for other areas like Algonquin Park, for example. And so they, there's probably 4 available maps now, large scale maps for Temagami. But it just gives the distance. It doesn't give you any information on the map at all. So people come up from Algonquin or other places where parks are well tended, portages are wide, fairly easy. They get to Temagami and they say, "Oh, the portages, look how short they are, like 150 meters. Wow, this is great." And they get there and they say, "Wow, this is insane stuff." And people turn back. People have been turning back, and they get up to North Channel ADL and they get up to Center Falls, and my bridge has been taken out for years now, and people have to scale this cliff to get up there, and it's ledgy, it's rocky, it's slippery, it's and people are cursing all the way. So this isn't like Algonquin Park at all. So and they're just using a map, and a lot of these maps aren't accurate. So I tell people, look, I spent years. Most of the maps are using my information that I went out back in the 1970s and cataloged all these old Nestogan routes, in order to protect them. There's another thing about the guidebooks that people don't understand too, is that they were done initially and purposely to protect the backcountry routes. And Temagami was my first book. This is one of the original copies. You might have seen that around somewhere, and it's this was the it had 150 typo errors, but we sold 5,000 copies the first year it came out.
That's awesome.
And now it's and now it's going into its 12th edition. I've sold out of books, but temporarily I don't have any stock. But that's the new book, the third edition from Firefly, and 12th printing.
That's sweet.
But Temagami, yeah, that's and all the guidebooks that I've done had a different had a very strong environmental nub to them, and that was to protect the watersheds primarily from that advancement of logging, mining, road building, all that. A lot of these areas didn't have protection, and it's great that canoeists use them. They're a valuable resource for canoeists. It makes the trip a little bit safer, and so it's kind of it was a double purpose to the books, but primarily it was all my books were done to try to protect some of these watersheds from industrial invasion, I guess.
We could go off and we could talk about the abuse of nature that our government is currently doing. But I still see things about what certainly whether like there don't hold me to it. It's something crazy, like 70% of Algonquin is still open to logging, and they are still doing logging. That's specific to Algonquin, but I understand that it's happening in a number of other places like Temagami. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure I read an article about somebody was caught because it was illegal logging. Like they weren't even coming close to what they're supposed to be doing. Is this a happens all the time kind of thing? Like do you spot this sort of stuff?
Well, it's interesting. You think that we're in an age of accountability, and yeah, I'd like to believe that we've made headway with regards to responsible logging and responsible managing. It's really hard. This was this is not just, you know, an Ontario Algonquin Park, you know, Northeast Ontario thing. This is province wide. It's Canada wide.
Well,
You
it's
know,
kind of global.
there's I could ramble on about the politics of wilderness, and you know, and a lot of people would be amazed at and disappointed at how, you know, our resources are mismanaged. And we look at, you know, the East Coast fisheries, both, you know, the Atlantic and the Pacific, and how good a job we've done with that. And, you know, it was, you know, coming out of the 50s and 60s, it was, you know, we just figured that, well, Canada is an inexhaustible resource for all of these things. And you know, there was no long-term vision and no long-term planning. We didn't even have, it was our environment group, Earth Roots, Temagami Wilderness Society at the beginning, who embarrassed the government into recognizing old growth forest did exist in the province of Ontario. And, you know, the logging practices have changed drastically, as, you know, most people, you know, realize that they were still using horses in the 1960s to draw out, you know, select cut timber from the bush. And you know, now, you know, since the 1970s, it's industrialization of the forest is and technology has changed the scope of logging. You know, that we didn't have clear cuts way back with. It was more high grading of the species that they required, that they needed at the time, except for, you know, clearing farmland. That there was, I guess that was our original, you know,
Clear cutting.
Yep. For survival purposes, for, you know, building that agricultural base that we needed to survive as a country. But we didn't understand, you know, what is an old growth forest, and that it takes centuries to replicate an old growth forest. And this is, you know, what's happening now in not just in the pine lands of, you know, central Ontario, but we're looking at the boreal forest now with you know, the approach to you know, cutting large swaths of, you know, spruce for pulp mills and et cetera. I've seen it. I've seen that. You know, I helped a friend do a study on the boreal owl years ago up in Opusataka and Kapuskasing area. They did an old logging camp, and was amazed. We were amazed at over a 2-year period how much forest it did, as far as the eye could see. And they were cutting, you know, spruce trees down maybe 6 to 8 inches thick that were up to 200 years old, and that it was all going to Spruce Falls Pulp and Power Company for, you know, and they fed 2 companies in the United States. They all went to the United States. Kimberly-Clark, you know, for Kleenex and toilet paper, and New York Times. So all of this disposable product, you know, coming from our boreal forest, and it's still happening. So it's, you know, and that's our biggest one of our biggest concerns now is that the boreal forest is, you know, our respirator. It's our livelihood on this planet. So it's you know, that's one of the, you know, our biggest, I think, I'd say, forest concerns at you know, in the long term.
And are you seeing a change in wildlife based on loss of habitat?
Yes, big time. I mean, you look at a good example is the woodland caribou. It's a wilderness park on the border of Manitoba, and Manitoba, Atikamekw Wilderness Park adjoins it, and, you know, cut right through the middle with the political boundary. So each park is managed differently. You know, back in the Indigenous days, there was no such thing as fences and political boundaries, and, you know, and districts and things, and you can't really manage, like, and it's insane because when you think about it, that the river systems that flow into Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba, you know, a lot of those major rivers are sourced in Ontario. And of course, you know, you manage those headwater systems differently in one province. It's going to affect everything downstream. Boundaries are arbitrary. I worked on the Temagami Wilderness Park boundary for months, and they threw it in the garbage because it took too much. It was 4 times the size as it is now, and it took too much of the timber resource away from logging companies. So they trashed it, and then, you know, since that park was established, they've added on conservation reserves and waterway parks, but they left big donut holes where they're just, you know, rip roaring through with their logging practices. And It's really a shame. It should have been parkland years ago,
right from the beginning.
Woodland Caribou and Woodland Caribou Wilderness Park. It was some of the best feeding grounds for woodland caribou were just outside the boundaries, and that's they log right to that political boundary of the park, and it doesn't make any sense. So park systems are usually arbitrary boundaries just based on resource extraction, not on good science or the care for our indigenous species, whether it's First Nations or whether it's our wildlife. And it's bad. The political landscape in Ontario is just terrible because they've changed the Endangered Species Act and the Environmental Assessment Act, and made it really difficult for conservation and environment groups to get in, make any ground, and make any headway. This government's knocked us back probably three decades in the environmental movement.
Yeah, you're going to get no argument from me there. I'm terribly disappointed with the direction that they're going, which is so backwards. But
when you look at the green belt, that's a good example of the mentality of this. So he looks at how can we make some money? Where can we build more houses? And we need more houses instead of green belts. And he looks at the park systems. We don't have enough parks for people to go to, and a lot of them are overmanaged and overpriced. Canoe camping, backcountry travel used to be affordable for everybody. Now it's
the same as front country. Like, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, but that's fine because you can put 9 people on your site. I don't want 9 people with me in the backcountry. That's kind of the point, man. Hap, we're coming up. We're 2.5 minutes from the end of our 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna do our outro. Dennis was totally right. Just, you know what? Just ask him a question. Let him go.
We have so many more questions.
We do. So seriously, at some point, if your schedule ever opens up, I would love to have you back on. There's so many other things I'd like to talk to you about. This was fantastic. This is going to be a super easy edit for me, just because we're talking about all the environmental things that
it's important,
that matter to us, that are important, and thank you for your wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, so appreciate.
Well, I appreciate like programs like yours are great because it gets the message out, and I think that's the important thing. So
honestly, that's what we're hoping to do.
Appreciate the work that you
sort of our woo. All right, so we're gonna let the young lady start the outro, and it'll cut off. It's going to cut off in like 1 minute and 38 seconds, just so you know. It's bang.
Thank you so much to our special guest, Hap Wilson, for joining us today. Please do reach out to him. His website is hapwilson.com, and Google him. You will find him everywhere. But please do reach out to him. He's just amazing. Check out his books. The guidebooks are awesome. The artwork in the guidebooks is awesome, and all done by Hap Wilson. We so appreciate him joining us today. Anyways, that's it for us for today. We will talk to you again soon. I'm Pamela.
I'm still Tim.
And we are from supergoodcamping.com. Please do reach out to us on all the social media, and our website is supergoodcamping.com. And all of our connections are there if you want to find us there. We do also have a YouTube channel. We'd love it if you subscribe to us on YouTube. Talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.